I really want to hear more about the diving. Take your time. Thanks, Dana. President Trump sprints down to the stretch ahead of the midterms with two big campaign rallies. More tough talk about immigration. We will take you inside the government's election security plan with an exclusive interview. And the biggest raise in average pay in almost a decade highlights a stellar jobs report. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. We are just 4 days from Tuesday's crucial midterm election. Hard to believe. 4 days. President Trump is right now halfway through a campaign doubleheader on this final Friday. In addition to stumping for Republican candidates, the president is continuing his hard sell on his signature issue for this political season, immigration and border security. But he's also riding a positive wave of economic news in the final days of this campaign. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off tonight, as he often does. This time, even the president's critics, John, are saying this is a stellar jobs report.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Brett, back in 1992, you'll remember, Bill Clinton won the presidency on the mantra of "it's the economy, stupid." Back then, the economy was a bad news story. Today, it's a good news story. But the question is, does good news motivate voters to the polls in the same way that bad news does? President Trump certainly hopes so.
People can now get the job they want. So the numbers are about as good as you'll ever see.
President Trump departed the White House for campaign rallies in West Virginia and Indiana today with another issue to take to voters, another month of strong job creation and low unemployment.
The economy is on fire. I think it may be the greatest economy our country's ever had. And I hope people realize that when they go out on Tuesday and they vote, or if they do early voting. But I hope people realize that.
But he also kept up the drumbeat on illegal immigration at his first stop, insisting nothing less than America's sovereignty is at stake.
Caravan after caravan is forming unvetted illegal aliens trying to flood into our country on your dollar, overwhelming your schools, depleting your resources, and endangering your community.
The migrant caravans are nowhere near the United States, yet today, a dozen Hondurans in the caravan sued President Trump for denying them their Fifth Amendment rights to due process, saying they have a constitutional right to request asylum. Asked about the lawsuit, President Trump today turned his fire on the Honduran government.
They let their people come up and they form their caravans in the country. They are doing nothing. We're paying them hundreds of millions of dollars. Guess what? That money's going to stop very soon.
The president also clarified a statement that raised eyebrows yesterday when he seemed to suggest the U.S. military might use lethal force if migrants try to force their way across the border.
They want to throw rocks at our military fights back. We're going to consider it. I told him, consider it a rifle.
Today, President Trump said it's not his intention to have anyone shooting anybody.
No. But if our soldiers or Border Patrol or ICE are going to be hit in the face with rocks, we're going to arrest those people. That doesn't mean shoot them, but we're going to arrest those people quickly and for a long period of time.
There also appeared to be some movement on the China issue today. President Trump confirming he will meet with President Xi at the G20 in Buenos Aires later this month, indicating China may be changing its tune on trade.
They very much want to make a deal. As you know, their economy went way down since we've been doing this skirmish. I spoke with President Xi yesterday. They very much want to make a deal.
Well, President Trump is optimistic about the possibility of making a new trade deal with China. He is also prepared to take a baseball bat to them, threatening tariffs on another $257 billion worth of Chinese goods if they don't play ball. Brett?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thanks. The jobs report John spoke about was not enough to put stocks in positive territory. Could have been spooked by the China news. The Dow lost 110 today. The S&P 500 dropped 17. The Nasdaq fell 77. For the week, the Dow gained 2 1/3 percentage points. The S&P 500 was up almost 2.5. The Nasdaq finished ahead 2 2/3. Susan Lee of the Fox Business Network joins us from New York with more on this jobs number and what it means. Good evening, Susan.
Bret, more jobs, higher wages, and a near 50-year low unemployment rate. A strong labor report in the month of October. U.S. companies adding 250,000 jobs. That's far more than anticipated, and in spite of Hurricanes Michael and Florence. The jobless rate holding steady at 3.7%. Wages were the bright spot, jumping the most in close to a decade. Wage gains had been a lag point in an otherwise tight labor market with high job creation. In fact, October was such a good month, even a former Democratic economic advisor to Obama and Biden, Jared Bernstein, said it was everything you could want in a monthly jobs report. And President Trump couldn't agree more.
The 250,000 new jobs in October was an incredible number. We also had a wage increase of 3.1%. It's like a perfect increase. It's an incredible number, but it's a perfect increase. So the country is doing, I think, maybe you could say better than it's ever done.
Virtually every sector was hiring in October. Manufacturing, a focus point for the U.S. president, continued to add jobs at over twice the pace of last year, adding over 30,000 in the month. Healthcare, construction, and transport and warehousing also showing strong job ads. Now, as for the demographic breakdown, October continuing to show historically low jobless rates for blacks, Asians, and Hispanics. And the confidence in finding jobs is encouraging Americans to spend, with consumer confidence at its highest in 18 years. And consumer spending is extremely important to the U.S. economy, making up over 2/3 of it, driving the U.S. economy on pace for its best year of economic growth since 2005. But that also means the Federal Reserve will be raising interest rates. Economists are concerned that will further drag on the housing and auto loan sector. Bret, back to you.
You know, Susan, quickly, I said earlier that the markets have been spooked about China and the tariff situation, but today it seemed that the markets took a dip because of Apple dropping some 7% today. Kind of a big deal for Wall Street.
It is a big deal, especially with the biggest company in the world, and they missed on guidance, but still making record profit in the quarter. All
right, Susan Lee in New York. Susan, thanks. Tonight, Iran is bracing for what figures to be a major blow to its already shaky economy. Monday, the U.S. reimposes tough sanctions that were eased during the Iran nuclear deal. State Department correspondent Rich Edson tells us what's in store for next week from the State Department. Good evening, Rich.
Hi, good evening, Brett. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the administration is targeting the core of Iran's economy and essentially exiting its participation in the Iran nuclear deal. On Monday, the U.S. will restore sanctions against Iran's oil, banking, and shipping sectors. The administration says these sanctions will hit 700 individuals, entities, vessels, and aircraft.
It is aimed at depriving the regime of the revenues that it uses to spread death and destruction around the world. Our ultimate aim is to compel Iran to permanently abandon its well-documented outlaw activities and behave as a normal country.
These sanctions will penalize those importing Iran's oil, except 8 as-yet named countries. Officials say they've given these countries more time because they've worked with the administration to reduce their Iranian oil imports. They're expected to include India, Japan, South Korea, and possibly China. Though some Republicans, like Senator Marco Rubio, say they are concerned. Quote, sanctions waivers being given to key purchasers of Iranian oil, most alarmingly China, give Iran a financial reprieve and should be eliminated as soon as possible. Rubio also says the administration must do more to cut Iran from the international finance system and an entity called SWIFT, which helps enable international transactions. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says SWIFT will cut off all sanctioned banks as soon as it's technically possible. Britain, Germany, and France and the European Union, they're still committed to the Iran nuclear deal. They say the nuclear agreement, quote, provides for the lifting of international sanctions in order to have a positive impact on trade and economic relations with Iran, but most importantly on the lives of the Iranian people. They say they are committed to help conduct business with Iran as allowed under the nuclear agreement and despite U.S. sanctions. Brett?
Rich Edson, live at the State Department. Rich, thank you. President Trump says he hopes there will be no meddling or tampering during next week's election. He says his administration has spent a lot of time and money to try to prevent that. Tonight, we go inside the government's plans to try to keep the election secure. Here's Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge with a Fox News exclusive.
We haven't seen any activity that we can attribute directly to a foreign nation.
Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen will oversee the nationwide Situation Room on election night that tracks cyber threats to voter databases, as well as online efforts using propaganda and disinformation to influence voters' perceptions and decision-making.
We're going to have the most secure election in the modern age.
Nielsen spoke exclusively with Fox about the new security measures, a day after she, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and the nation's intelligence chief, DNI Dan Coats, briefed the president.
His basic message was elections are the heart of our democracy. It's extraordinarily important that Americans have confidence in them.
The National Cybersecurity Command Center and DHS have added monitoring that covers about 90% of registered voters. Known as Albert sensors, the program flags cyber intruders. Now DHS says more than half of all states have completed vulnerability assessments.
If there was an attack on the voting Tuesday, there would be a U.S. government response.
Absolutely.
That's the president's position.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a lot of reporting it would be a cyber response. Is that on the table?
Everything is on the table.
The intelligence community recently warned Russia, China, and Iran leveraged social media to amplify issues that divide voters. Last cycle, a Russian troll factory masqueraded online as U.S. citizens. Earlier this year, Beijing sponsored pro-China ads to sway American farmers.
We continue to see extraordinarily aggressive actions by multiple countries to influence the way in which Americans think, and in some cases, such as China, to perhaps change our policies.
Nielsen notes foreign governments and hackers may not breach voting systems, but she warns they still exploit election night
to sow confusion, discord, and mistrust by placing stories in social media or state-sponsored media that something was wrong.
On Election Day, Homeland Security says they will also partner with the RNC and DNC. Secretary Nielsen said Americans should not jump to conclusions if there is a problem and wait for an independent assessment from FBI, DHS, and the intelligence community. Brett.
Catherine Harris live in New York. Catherine, thank you. Up next, should there be no punishment at all for low-level drug crimes? One state has that option on the ballot next week. We'll bring you there. First, what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. WSVN in Miami, as a mail bomb suspect Cesar Sayak agrees to be transferred from Miami to New York to face charges of sending explosive devices to prominent Democrats, Trump critics, and CNN. Sayak also agreed to not seek immediate release on bail. Fox 5 in New York, where Alec Baldwin has been arrested for allegedly punching someone during a dispute over a parking spot. Police say the actor was taken into custody this afternoon in Manhattan's West Village neighborhood. A representative for Baldwin did not immediately respond to a message requesting comment, and Baldwin did not comment outside the police station. And this is a live look at San Francisco from Fox 2, our affiliate there. One of the big stories there tonight, a San Francisco 49ers cheerleader took a knee during the national anthem just before last night's game against the Oakland Raiders. Her image was captured on camera and has gone viral on Twitter and elsewhere. Comments on social media ranged from calling her a hero to those outraged with her action. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. The U.S. Supreme Court has denied a Trump administration request to delay next week's trial on a proposed citizenship question in the 2020 census. Several states and civil rights groups are challenging that plan. They allege an improper political motive. The administration says officials should not be subjected to questions about motivation. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley is going after another woman who accused then Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of rape. Grassley has referred Judy Monroe Layton to the Justice Department for investigation of potential criminal false statements. She claimed to be the author of an anonymous allegation originally sent to Senator Kamala Harris. Monroe Layton later admitted she was not the author and had never met Kavanaugh. Grassley has made similar referrals concerning Kavanaugh accuser Julie Swetnick and her lawyer Michael Avenatti. One of the more interesting ballot initiatives in Tuesday's midterms is in Ohio. It would radically change the way drug crimes are treated in that state. Correspondent Douglas Kennedy shows us how.
Historically, we've seen that prison doesn't work.
Keith Beekler has been treating addicts both in and out of prison for 25 years. And he says incarceration often gets in the way of real recovery. Addicts really need some form of treatment if they're going to stay clean.
Correct. You know, the threat of punishment is good for a lot of people in society, an overwhelming majority. But when it comes to addicts, they don't think like average people think.
Right now, Ohio prisons are 30% over capacity. It's just one of the reasons Buechler is now supporting a ballot measure here that would make low-level drug possession a misdemeanor rather than a felony. Ohio Issue 1 would also prohibit sending people to prison for non-criminal parole violations and would set aside a large percentage of a projected $100 million savings for addiction treatment. It's a proposal that's getting a lot of pushback. Many in law enforcement here are really opposed to this.
Well, not only law enforcement, the judiciary across the state, it's a devastating, reckless, and dangerous proposal.
Paul Pfeiffer is a former state Supreme Court judge and current executive director of the Ohio Judicial Conference. He says judges and prosecutors oppose Question 1 because it provides too much carrot and not enough stick. So Question 1 to you basically removes punishment.
It removes punishment completely. First two offenses, no jail, no prison. You can't get an addict into treatment without the threat of punishment.
So opponents say addicts cannot get clean without punishment or the threat of punishment. What do you say?
Well, they can, and they do.
He says prison and the threat of prison can actually make many addicts rebel from treatment. In Columbus, Ohio, Douglas Kennedy, Fox News.
Up next, we look at two of the most hotly contested Senate races of this midterm election season. First, beyond our borders tonight, the leaders of Russia and Cuba are vowing to expand their strategic ties. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Cuban counterpart Miguel Diaz-Canel are also calling for the U.S. to end its blockade of Cuba. The two leaders met today in Moscow. Hamas says protests along the Gaza-Israel border fence have been scaled down to give diplomatic efforts a chance. Only a few thousand Palestinians rallied at the frontier today. More than 160 Palestinians have been killed in the demonstrations since they began in March. Residents in Kabul, Afghanistan are dealing with the aftermath of a massive fire that destroyed hundreds of stores overnight at the city's largest market for electronic goods and home appliances. No casualties were reported, but the loss was estimated in the millions of dollars. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. This is the final weekend before the November midterm elections, and there are still a lot of questions about which party will end up with control of the House and the Senate. Tonight, we look at two of the big races in the Senate. First up, correspondent Peter Ducey in Missouri, where incumbent Democrat Claire McCaskill is fighting for her political survival.
Even though Missouri is more than 1,000 miles from Mexico, the caravan is central to Josh Hawley's campaign to unseat Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill.
We're the show me state, so Senator McCaskill, if you're really serious about border security, show me.
McCaskill, a top Trump target, is also starting to talk tough about border crossers.
They have to pay a penalty and a price for not abiding by the rules. We can never just wave away lawbreakers. They broke the law. So there needs to be a price that's paid.
Now Hawley is trying to make McCaskill prove her point and reverse her support for the Keep Families Together Act.
I would just say to her this: if you're for it, prove it. Take your name today. Take your name off Dianne Feinstein's open borders bill.
McCaskill's bigger focus in the final days of the race is health care. She's warning voters about a lawsuit challenging Obamacare filed by Hawley in his official role as Attorney General in a Teen Vogue op-ed that says, in part, now, thanks to Missouri's Attorney General and my opponent for U.S. Senate, Josh Hawley, Missourians are worried that they could once again be denied health insurance just because they've been sick before. Hawley shakes off that claim about the lawsuit.
She is a liberal left Democrat who's more interested in Barack Obama's political legacy than in the patients of Missouri. That's got to change.
Republican lawmakers like Missouri's Senator Roy Blunt see Hawley as a reliable vote for their side and a way to offset the influence of some more unpredictable Republicans.
The bigger that majority gets, the more leeway you have to do just a little more And frankly, every member loses a little leverage when you add members.
President Trump is making Missouri a priority by making it his last stop of the cycle, something Hawley hopes will help with the state's enormous base of farmers who he says are fans of the USMCA trade deal.
And to see him get that deal, I think is huge. And they are confident that he'll be able to get more and better deals for them in the future.
The president's rally here on Election Eve will be his second stop in Missouri in 4 days. He was just here last night and told the crowd to pretend that Hawley is 1 point down as a way to encourage turnout in a race that a Fox News poll finds to be tied. Brett?
Peter Ducey in Missouri tonight. Peter, thanks. President Trump will hold a rally in Indianapolis next hour. He's there to support Republican Senate candidate Mike Braun, who's trying to oust Democrat incumbent Joe Donnelly. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin is in Indianapolis tonight.
The party's big guns are descending on the Hoosier state to push their guy over the finish line. Former President Barack Obama arrives Sunday for the incumbent Joe Donnelly. And President Trump's first of 2 rallies for Mike Braun is minutes away.
It's meant a lot from the get-go because I think Indiana, if we don't win it, it's going to be probably a rough night.
I hope you're on the Supreme Court. That's exactly where you should be.
With a great deal of popularity following the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina came to stump for Braun, highlighting Senator Donnelly's no vote and what Graham characterized as disgraceful behavior from Democrats.
Let me tell you, if you're tied with these folks on the left right now, they're going to pull you in a ditch, and that's a ditch Indiana doesn't need to be in.
A rising star and possible 2020 presidential candidate, Democrat Cory Booker, the first African-American senator from New Jersey, hit the campaign trail, emphasizing Donnelly's posture as a moderate.
He's about helping people, all people. He's not a Republican or a Democrat. He's an American. He's a Hoosier. He represents those values every day.
The most recent Fox News poll showed Senator Donnelly pulling ahead by 7 points, but the polls have been so back and forth. The Real Clear Politics average shows Donnelly's lead is less than a point. The race is close because the candidates are similar. Healthcare tops the issues. Donnelly emphasizes guarantees for pre-existing conditions. Braun emphasizes keeping costs down. Analysts say Donnelly needs to run in the middle to survive in a state that voted 19 points in favor of Trump, so he campaigns as a uniter, a Democrat who is pro-life and pro-gun, and who voted with President Trump 62% of the time.
I will work with any president, but I don't work for any president. I work for the people of Indiana.
Republicans are bringing out the Indiana star power. Vice President Mike Pence, a former Indiana governor, will be the president's warm-up act. Legendary basketball coach Bobby Knight of Indiana fame, as well as Lou Holtz from Notre Dame, will rally the troops with a shared goal of putting their preferred candidate, Mike Braun, over the top. Brett, back to you.
Mike Tobin in Indianapolis. Mike, thanks. Pro-life groups are once again condemning Facebook for what they say is censorship of their message. Senior political correspondent Mike Emanuel tonight on what Facebook did and keeps doing.
Just days ahead of the 2018 midterm elections, a prominent pro-life group says it's being censored by social media giant Facebook for ads like this one.
Thankfully, we have pro-life champion Marsha Blackburn running for Senate. Blackburn voted to ban barbaric partial birth abortions. Marsha Blackburn values life.
Facebook pulled that ad down, reapproved it yesterday, and hours later, Facebook did the same thing to a similar ad supporting Montana Senate candidate Matt Rosendale. Susan B. Anthony List says this has happened with 4 of its ads 6 times over the past month.
It's been incredibly frustrating, our ability to reach a key demographic of voters in key battleground states, to have Facebook censoring our ads.
Facebook insists it does not have policies that prohibit pro-life speech, and a spokesperson apologized for what the company calls a mistake. Quote, neither of these ads violate Facebook's policies, and they should never have been rejected. But it wasn't just those pro-life commercials. It also happened to ads that highlighted children named Charlotte and Micah who received life-saving medical care after being born prematurely. This is just the latest controversy involving Facebook over the past 2 years. From the spread of misinformation by Russians to the mishandling of users' data to accusations of stifling conservative speech.
This is actually a concern that I have and that I try to root out in the company, is making sure that we don't have any bias in the work that we do.
A Facebook source tells Fox this error was as a result of automated systems, but conservatives say those errors never seem to happen with liberal groups. Brett?
Mike, thanks. A couple of notes for your calendar. Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern, MarthaMacCallum and I will preview the Tuesday elections. We'll be analyzing key races across the country and share what we'll be looking for on election night with a host of analysts and reporters. Speaking of the big night, Tuesday coverage begins 6 p.m. Eastern and will go well into the night. We'll have reporters spread all over the country, a cast of thousands basically bringing you full coverage of all the results as we get them. President Trump is highlighting a pair of campaign rallies, and former President Obama gets into the act across the country. We'll look at the star power for the final weekend before the midterms and the issues when we come back.
Caravan after caravan is forming unvetted illegal aliens trying to flood into our country on your dollar, overwhelming your schools, depleting your resources, and endangering your community.
They're telling you the existential threat to America is a bunch of poor refugees 1,000 miles away. They're even taking our brave troops away from their families for a political stunt.
Well, there's the back and forth on the campaign trail as you see the president and the former president back and forth. The president is finishing this campaign blitz in West Virginia, Indianapolis tonight, Montana, Pensacola, Florida tomorrow, Georgia, Tennessee on Sunday, Ohio, Indiana, and Missouri on Monday. But he's also riding a wave of good economic news.
America now has the best economy in the history of our country, and we want to keep it that way. In the last month alone, we added, this just came out a few hours ago, 250,000 jobs. That's in the month of October, by the way. That's for 1 month. And nearly 500,000 Americans returned to the workforce. We've created 4.5 million new jobs since the election.
So that October jobs report was stellar. Even critics of the president say, yeah, it's pretty good. 250,000 jobs, 3.7, 49-year low for the unemployment rate. If you look at the changes in the economy since the president took office, GDP growth, unemployment rate, real bump in consumer confidence, and average hourly earnings are up, which is a big deal as well. So with all of that, let's bring in our panel. Josh Kraushaar is political editor for National Journal. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at the Federalist, and Charles Lane, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Okay, Josh, you know, we haven't heard that much, a ton, about the economy on the trail. Today's jobs number clearly is a closing argument for some of these Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem from the White House, that you don't hear the president talking as much about the economy as he is about immigration. And, you know, in the red states, in Missouri, Indiana, West Virginia, I mean, immigration is a pretty potent issue. It is something that is rallying the conservative base. But when you look at the House map and you're looking at, you know, how many seats could end up flipping in suburban areas that are just a little bit uncomfortable with that anti-immigration, anti-illegal immigration rhetoric, there's a lot of Republican strategists that are wondering why President Trump's not talking about all the good economic news and focusing so much on immigration.
Molly.
Well, as James Carville noted, it's the economy, stupid. People really are motivated, particularly when the economy is bad. When things are not going well, people very much want to throw the bums out. I think the main significance of the economy being so good, and it's been really good for a while now, is that it has tempered that desire to throw the bums out or completely change the management of the country. And a lot of it is just directly tied to Republican policies, whether it's tax cuts or regulatory pullback or, you know, any of the other things that the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress have done. And particularly noteworthy, I think, is the increase in hourly wages. A lot of times we've had good economic news where it seems to benefit the wealthy and not necessarily trickle down. This is really good for employees and people throughout the economic.
Speaking of the immigration issue, in one race in Missouri, it is playing interestingly. The incumbent Democrat speaking about supporting President Trump. Take a listen.
Stop them at the border.
And what do you do? When they get to the border, what do you do?
I think the president has to use every tool he has at his disposal, and I'm 100% back him up on that. Whether it is turning them back because we are not equipped to handle that many asylum claims into our system.
If you're for it, prove it. Take your name today. Take your name off Dianne Feinstein's open borders bill. Claire McCaskill is sponsoring that bill in the United States Senate. She has been for months. So put your money where your mouth is. Take your name off the bill. Do it right now.
You know, Chuck, the Republicans call it the open borders bill. It's actually not called that, but it is a bill that Feinstein, every Democrat signed on to, and it essentially has this thing that says you can't arrest anybody within 100 miles of the border, even for anything, if they're an illegal alien.
You know, my reaction to a lot of the things the president has been saying over the last week is that he is playing on people's fears, particularly with respect to this caravan, which will probably peter out long before it gets to the border. Having said that, he's not doing it by accident. He's doing it because the fears exist. And Claire McCaskill's interview with you epitomizes that perfectly. I believe Joe Donnelly is saying similar things in Indiana, and he understands that in red states he has the Democrats on the defensive. And with respect to that bill, that just illustrates the Democrats' inability so far to come up with a popular message regarding immigration that speaks about the issue in a way that's both positive toward immigration and capable of gaining a majority. Instead, you have people like Claire McCaskill kind of running away from the National Party and the Washington-based party and their message. And I think that if there's any hope or saving grace for that within it, for the Democrats, it has to do with Josh's point about the suburbs. I think the red-hot stuff that the president is presenting on immigration may be turning off moderate and more moderate Republicans and women in those suburban districts that they need to hold.
We'll see, and we'll see how much the economy and this final jobs report moves people one way or another. I want to put up the power rankings as of tonight before I get race by race. In the Senate, we have it really the same as we've had it, 50 Republicans, 45 Democrats. This takes a look at the races, the leans, the likelies. We have 5 toss-up races there. That will decide the balance of power there. In the House, it keeps shifting. 31 toss-up races. Now we have it down to 29. You need 218 for the majority. That is where the Democrats are better positioned to take over the majority. Only need a few more to pick up about 17 to get that, if you count the likelies. All right, race by race. Josh.
Well, one of the House races that I'm looking really closely at is the 6th District of Kentucky, Mitch McConnell's backyard. It's a Trump district. He won it by about 20 points, but the Democrat, who's a celebrated military veteran, Amy McGrath, is running neck and neck with the Republican Congressman Andy Barr. McConnell folks are really watching this race closely. It closes early. We'll know the results pretty quickly. It's a big bellwether.
Molly.
I chose Pennsylvania 16. This is the kind of race that if Democrats win this, it will point to them having a very big night. This is a district that Trump won by 20, that Romney won by 5. You have one poll with Mike Kelly up and another poll with Ron DeNicola up. And so depending on how that goes might be an indicator of the whole evening.
I tell you, those House polls are tough. You know, it's just not... It doesn't seem like it really sticks. All these polls are kind of 1-2 points, could really swing each one of these races.
Well, since everybody's using the number 6, I have the 6th district too, but in Illinois.
Seriously, it's 666? I don't know if that's
16.
Oh, okay.
Peter Roskam is the incumbent Republican. He's been there since 2006, and Republicans have held this seat since 1972 through all the blue waves that went to and fro in that time. But Roskam is in the race of his life against Democrat Sean Casten. And this is one of those races that really epitomizes, because it went for Hillary Clinton. This district went for Hillary by 7 points last time around. A lot of Republicans retired rather than run in districts where Hillary won. Roskam is giving it a try. If he can't pull it off there, I think it's going to show there's a long night ahead for Republicans, because it's typical of those bellwether, now purple suburban districts that the Republicans have to hold if they're going to have any hope of keeping the majority.
All right, panel, thank you. Hundreds of races to call on Tuesday night. It's going to be fun. Next up, Iran sanctions, Facebook censorship, and winners and losers.
On November 5th, the United States will reimpose sanctions that were lifted as part of the nuclear deal on Iran's energy, shipbuilding, shipping, and banking sectors. These sanctions hit at core areas of Iran's economy. They are necessary to spur changes we seek. on the part of the regime.
They have focused their plans on placing the great Iranian nation under economic problems so that the people will be fed up and bow down before America. We must stay together and bring the U.S. to its knees on both these social and economic issues.
Iran sanctions going back in place on Monday. The president tweeting out a picture saying they're coming in Game of Thrones style, which had Twitter's heads exploding all over the place. Back with panel Chuck.
Well, I mean, you just can't, you don't know what to say about the winter is coming reference there, but the real story here is that this has been coming because this has been Mike Pompeo's plan all along. We got to get out of the nuclear, and the president's get out of the nuclear deal and really crack down on Iran and show that the Obama policy was the misguided way to work with Iran's, other behavior in the region besides just the nuclear thing. And by the way, this is one reason that the administration treads so lightly around the issue of Jamal Khashoggi, because they believe they need to keep the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on their side as a bulwark against Iran. And this demonstrates why that murder had to be handled so gingerly, because they knew that November 5th was coming up, or in their view had to be handled. So
point out that HBO didn't find that tweet that nicely. But Molly, go ahead on this.
Well, regardless of what you think about pulling out of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, I think it is worth saying that the administration has done a pretty good job of handling that departure process. You want to make sure that you are decreasing the amount of oil on the market without spiking the cost per barrel, so that Iran can benefit as if nothing had happened. And so they've done a good job, I think, of combining some waivers to keep the things going without having it be tons of profit. I think Marco Rubio was concerned about the waivers, which I don't think you need to be, but he was right to be concerned about what's going to happen with Iran's role in the international banking system. And that is something that people really need to stay on top of, so that you don't see all these other countries that didn't support our departure from the Iran nuclear deal supporting them in a different way.
All right, politics. Marsha Blackburn's political ad. Take a listen.
Phil Bredesen wants taxpayers to pay for abortions for babies with Down syndrome. Phil Bredesen is just too extreme for Tennessee. Thankfully, we have pro-life champion Marsha Blackburn.
Well, that was yanked off Facebook and said they had to pull it down. Pro-life ads being blocked. The Susan B. Anthony list says it's happening. It's happened several times. Facebook said in a statement, neither of the ads violate Facebook's policies. They should never have been rejected. We're sorry for this mistake. The ads have been restored and now are running on Facebook. Josh, the pro-life folks are saying it's only happening to pro-life ads.
Yeah, Facebook, Twitter, all these social media platforms are really, really bad at figuring out the difference between a violent threat and political speech. And one of the things that they rely on is these algorithms, like sort of these robots deciding what's content that's safe and what's not. They should hire some people that actually, this actually relates to journalism. They actually are really, really bad at kind of figuring out what's traditional news and what's partisan opinion and what's fake news and what's real news. It would help to have some journalists. It would help to have some people who actually know this stuff to make decisions and actually help decide their content.
I got to roll. All right, this has to be lightning. Winner, loser?
My winner, we've talked about it, the American worker, because wages are up 3.1% year on year. Workforce participation way up. There's no way around it. Workers are winners this week. My loser was Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York, who completely fumbled, by his own admission now, a memorial for the victims of a terror attack in New York, 8 people whose names he forgot to read, and he had to come back and do it over and apologize.
All right, a little more lightning.
I just want to commend Rabbi Jeffrey Myers, who is the rabbi of the synagogue that suffered that horrible tragedy last week. In the most trying of circumstances, he showed an amazing amount of leadership and diplomacy and generosity when other people were really politicizing something that shouldn't have been politicized. My loser is Angela Merkel, who had been praised in recent years as the leader of the free world and put in opposition to President Trump. She announced this week that she's no longer going to seek her party's leadership position in the next race. She seems to be on the decline. Her party suffered a lot of losses as well in the last election.
Lightning?
Winner is Oprah rallying the Democrats in Georgia. She might run in 2020. She sounded awfully like a future presidential candidate. The loser, University of Maryland, who handled that tragedy where a 19-year-old football player died under the coach's watch. They initially kept Coach DJ Durkin, then the trustees fired him. I'm a Terps fan. This was just a really black eye in the University of Maryland family.
It really was this week. Panel, thank you. When we come back, notable quotables. Friday. You know what that means. Notable quotables.
A Tree of Life synagogue at 9:54 this morning. Calls were received that an active shooter was inside the building.
We must stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters to defeat anti-Semitism and vanquish the forces of hate.
You cannot end birthright citizenship with an executive order.
You don't need a constitutional amendment for birthright citizenship. The fake news is, in fact, and I hate to say this, in fact, the enemy of the people.
The press is not the enemy of the people.
By the end of this week, we will deploy over 5,200 soldiers to the southwest border.
They're even taking our brave troops away from their families for a political stunt.
We don't do stunts in this department. Thank you.
There's no one that's going to talk more about Donald Trump than Donald Trump.
I'm pretty good at estimating crowd size.
Do you want to run again?
Well, I'd like to be president.
If you had a campaign that didn't work out so well, take a lesson from that.
The crazy Democrats are people who walk in restaurants and scream in elected officials' faces.
The word racist is used about every Republican that's winning.
I didn't fight for Democrats or Republicans when I went to war. I fought for Americans.
I heard Oprah's in town today. I'm kind of a big deal, too.
Who voted? Then what the hell am I doing here tonight? Goodbye, everyone.
1 week right there. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and still unafraid. The story hosted by MarthaMacCallum here in Washington starts in just seconds. And by the way, we have this show, 8 p.m. Sunday. Martha and I will be there, and we will be laying down all the stuff that's coming up on Tuesday. It should be fun, Martha.
It's kind of